Hey, I'm Chris Januszewski and welcome to the Rebellious Times Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Noah Landow, founder of Macktez, a relationship-first IT consultancy based out of the Big Apple, New York. How are you doing, Noah?
Pretty good. Trying to stay warm during this cold season up here.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. We were talking beforehand how in Austin we've got 70, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything's hunky-dory over here. I'm sorry for you over there. My family keeps sending me pictures of the UK where they've literally had non-stop winter and no blue skies for months. So yeah, I'm sorry for everybody who's not in Austin.
It's an excuse to stay home and be cozy.
That's it. Well, there's that too as well. There is something to be said about the real seasons. So no, I'm super excited to have you on the show today, Nora. We've got some really interesting things to talk about. I'd love to start, I always like to start with the guest's background, kind of where you're from, how you got started, how you got to the point where you built and launched this successful IT consulting business in a very competitive space in a very competitive city.
Yeah, so I started with my business partner, my co-founder, Michael, and I, along with a group of other people, started 30 years ago. We're actually going to be celebrating our 30th anniversary later this year, I think.
Congratulations.
In October, or the fall. Yeah, kind
Amazing.
of a little eye-watering. I don't feel old enough for that, so
no,
that's
you don't look
startling.
old enough. I was going to ask, did you start your business at 10 years old?
I wish. I'm sure I would have had better excuses for some of my earlier missteps. We started about 30 years ago, kind of really coming from non-IT backgrounds. My degree is in architecture. His was in molecular biochemistry and biophysics. And we had a bunch of people from history and the arts and other areas. And even even now, our organization is often made up of people with backgrounds that are a little more varied than just sort of IT and CS. Over those 30 years, I think one of the sort of through lines for us has been really thinking about how the technology can solve a real problem, not sort of allowing it to become motivation for itself. Like this thing has to actually work for the people that are trying to do something with it. And that for many, many years was part of ourselves, kind of our own image of ourselves not being an MSP, which is a term in our industry for a managed service provider. And typically they're kind of priced in such a way that kind of you're kind of racing to the bottom cost-wise. There's a sort of a dollar amount per person or a dollar amount per machine. And there's a real pressure internally in that industry to kind of like make them as efficient and kind of cut as much of the kind of quality stuff out as possible, as much of the human touch. So we spent many years, most of our 30 years, really kind of avoiding that label. However, the technology and the industry and a bunch of very interesting things in that kind of sector have evolved over the last 5 to 10 years that we're now a little more comfortable embracing kind of the concept of MSP, but we describe ourselves as sort of hybrid. And by that, we mean that we do what's typically called technology consulting. We come in and kind of work with organizations and their in-house IT departments and staff and teams to kind of build things and redesign and kind of configure solutions to a whole wide range of different types of challenges. But then we also do have a team that manages those kinds of services. And for us, that kind of tries to find a balance between the sort of long-term relationships that have historically been kind of our real core focus. The managed service components tend to ebb and flow and change over time, certainly at the time scales we're used to 10, 20 years ago. Most of the technologies that would be considered modern MSP systems just didn't exist. Many of them weren't even an inkling in anyone's eyes or not even kind of a concept. So in many ways, a large part of our kind of slow, steady growth and attitude has been trying to sort of conceptualize what is the right mix of in-house teams, our team, technology consulting, managing services, using these packaged product, rolling these packaged products together into bundles that make sense. So that's been a kind of continuously evolving process for us.
Great. So just to add a little more context, when a company comes to you, obviously it sounds like they generally have an IT team or person in-house, but for whatever reason, the IT team aren't able to solve the challenges that they're bringing you in to solve. What does a typical team look like, the in-house team, and why can't they solve these challenges themselves? Why do they need you?
That's a great question. One of the trend lines, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, is what it means to be the in-house IT team. It's not unusual for that to be the human resources manager or director, or sometimes it's a director of operations. So we have organizations that are 50 people that don't have a person whose primary job responsibility is defined as IT. And that's been a through line for us for quite a lot of our history, is working with organizations that don't have 12 people running IT internally. They might have somebody, but their job is sort of nominally something else, but they've been tasked with owning that IT. That ranges all the way up to organizations which might have a 20-person IT department with their own help desk and their own senior director of IT and their own CTO. A lot of the range, the sort of pattern of interaction that we describe that encompasses that whole range is that we're working with organizations that are navigating periods of change. It might be a startup that's growing. It might be a really large, amazing, kind of long-running nonprofit that's trying to overhaul its infrastructure. It might be a sort of a for-profit company that's merging or kind of reconfiguring how it wants to operate. But in all those cases, we're sort of coming in and partnering with whatever the mix of either technical or operational individuals in order to sort of absorb some of the variability, bring some of our expertise and experience, and sort of like help chart a path together through that change by taking advantage of, the best the technology world has to offer at that moment.
Okay, great. And what sort of pain? So we all know, people who've been in the corporate world, we all have our own perspective. We've worked with IT people, and generally they're pretty cool people. They're pretty chill, they're pretty low key, and they're usually pretty reliable, right? But they have a lot of requests and they have to manage them and in a polite way steer the people in the company to do the right things to help them. What is the pain they're feeling when you come into the bid, or what is the pain that the execs and the IT team are feeling that makes it necessary to bring in Macktez?
It varies. There are numerous different types of instigating kind of events that are kind of like the reason why somebody looks around and says, we need to do something. We actually have a whole chapter on the book, which we'll talk about in a little while, Tame the Tech Beast, which was our chance to kind of try to distill some of these lessons learned into something that we're hoping people will read a little earlier in their thought process and kind of plant the seeds of how to think about some of these periods of dynamic change and how to prepare for the sort of the many variable kind of opportunities and challenges that come up when organizations are kind of doing a lot. In some sort of particulars, to give some examples, it's not unusual for an organization to get a cybersecurity requirement from a board member or an investor who says, hey, we now want you to comply with these requirements. Do you? And you have maybe a creative or a nonprofit organization that looks around and they're like, we don't know if we comply with these things. How do we figure this out? Sometimes it's like, you have a desktop support person who can kind of guess, but sometimes it's a matter of recognizing that you need to make major structural changes to the way that you onboard people, offboard people, the way that you grant access within your organization to who should have access to what. So cybersecurity and insurance is sort of one of those. Another common instance, unfortunately, is some sort of spear phishing or hack or target. We've had individual incidents where a senior executive is targeted by hackers or by criminals who are attempting to kind of con or extract money from them, or sometimes they're finding ways to get access to their credentials and use those to trick other members of the organization, like the finance team, into wiring money to incorrect accounts. So those are obviously, when those happen, terrible, and many people get involved, and the goal is to try to ensure that thing doesn't happen again. And then even other scenarios are, as I mentioned in passing a moment ago, we often get involved with organizations that are either building out an office or building out a facility. We worked with many parks in New York City over the years. We still work with Little Island, and that was literally a park that was built and floated down the river and kind of like put up on pylons, and we worked closely with all of the engineering and operation and all the other components to sort of ensure that the technology that was being provided by all these different vendors actually worked together and fit in the boxes it was supposed to go in, and performed appropriately for something that was sitting on water and all those kind of challenges.
Okay, and thanks for really interesting. Those aren't the sort of scenarios I would have expected, or I would, in my mind, think of IT being heavily involved in. So it looks like you touch a lot of different parts of the business. I think we're all in this space where AI, companies are trying to implement AI effectively in the right places in their businesses, and I'm sure that's a piece of what you do. And I'd love to know what your perspective is on how AI is affecting the operations within businesses, and how that relates to your business model.
That is a great question. I have a slightly evasive answer, in that I would give probably a slightly different answer 3 months ago and 3 months from now. The landscape of how effective AI tools are is so rapidly evolving and changing that it's difficult to like fully test and vet some of the systems, while also taking advantage of sort of the bleeding edge of what works best. So it feels like there's on a sort of personal individual level, there's often this tension between, oh, this tool seems really exciting, but by the time I finish doing my testing and vetting to feel comfortable putting real data into it, it's now, a time has passed, so it's no longer the latest, so some new thing has come. So there's a sort of tension, I think, in the sort of security and IT space, especially around AI, of like, how do you qualify and satisfy concerns? It's also an area that's a little bit Wild West in that some organizations will make claims about how data is protected, and then it turns out later that wasn't actually true. There's many organizations out there that are a little cavalier about their kind of policy enforcement internally. So as an organization who's evaluating AI, I think it's critical to take the time to look at the policies and kind of try to make an informed choice about which of these tools are appropriate and reasonable and legal in many cases. I do think that AI is having an extremely interesting and in some cases profound effect on a lot of different ways organizations work. At its most simplistic, I think it's changing this idea of things that used to require a person to sort of translate from A to B. Now there are more and more kind of potential for those things to be automated, for those things to happen in some sort of routine way. But there are trade-offs, and the trade-offs that you're forced to make in those scenarios are different now than they were as recently as 3 months ago. So I think it's such a dynamic space that a lot of the predictions are kind of people just sort of like throwing up their hands and making guesses. I do have a lot of conversations with a lot of people that are like AI researchers, and even they are often like, all the business people that are out there making bold predictions are really just making stuff up. It's all projection and sort of forecasting and guessing. But stuff is really happening, and there is something real here, but it's really difficult to define exactly what, with confidence.
I respect your answer there and your elusiveness. Not that you were elusive, but you said, you put it up front that you're going to be a little elusive. And I respect that because you're a relationship first company, right? And you don't want to go out there and offer, where a client is potentially looking for complete clarity on certain implementations of AI, where it's not easy for you or any IT service or other departments to give that, because it's such a fast evolving Wild West space, like you say. So you can kind of hold the hand and partner with them, but it's really up to the company and the risk culture that they have to be willing to try things, test things. Some things won't work, some things will work, right? But you don't want them coming back to you complaining, hey, this didn't work, when you're clearly setting expectations up front that you've not got the golden key to everything AI right now.
Yeah, I think that point you're making, which is not over-promising and under-delivering, I think is a common kind of IT sales pitch. I think people are very used to going and having a conversation with a vendor who says, this product's going to be amazing and it's going to solve all your problems. And I think most people who have done any IT implementations are jaded enough after doing a few of them to recognize that most products don't quite do that. They may be great, but they're not perfect. And AI is certainly no exception to that rule. I do think that it is important to take advantage of these tools. They do offer real advantages. I do worry a little bit not as an IT leader or a technology consultant, but as a business owner. I do worry a little bit about how many of the functionality, many of the tools and sort of systems that I think are being implemented now are being seen as replacing junior staff. And I do worry in a number of industries what will happen 5-10 years from now when there isn't a pipeline of individuals who had, finance and management consultant and technology and all these opportunities as a junior person to learn the ropes and grow through and up into more senior roles. I do worry that some of these industries are kind of destroying themselves potentially by essentially creating an end to the pipeline of future experienced senior people to run things, but it's too soon to know if that's actually Pollyanna or real, or if that maybe that's a unnecessary concern. But certainly that's something I worry about now.
Yeah, no, me too. And I think a lot of people do, especially as a father of kids who will come through the education system and, try and find their first job and learn, get a good mentor and progress, right?
Yeah.
We've got this pendulum that's swinging heavily one way and we think it's going to go so far. Maybe the pendulum swings back at some point, but it's very difficult to foresee exactly how that will play out.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also, there's a number of great stories on this from years ago, but it's really a fear of capitalism, not a fear of AI. I think that there are ways we could implement these systems, which would be fantastic for all involved. But as a small business owner, I recognize that a lot of times the kind of priorities and incentives are not aligned for the life-fulfilling success of the individuals involved. So kind of trying to keep that in mind when making strategic decisions that affect my own team.
Sure. For sure. Tell me about your approach to relationships. You've been in business for 30 years now, in a very competitive space. How do you sustain an advantage and keep customers for a long time and continue to build your business and your reputation?
Yeah, I think reputation is interesting. It's, we've had bad experiences. We've had relationships with clients that did not work out. We've certainly parted ways with clients. I remember meeting a company many, many years ago who had made the bold claim that they had never lost a client. And I remember being befuddled by that. And it was like, well, times change. How is that possible? And it turned out that they had a special legal gotcha in their contract that was a non-disparagement that prevented former
Okay.
clients from acknowledging that they are former clients. So it was sort of a little bit of a con job. And I think acknowledging that, we are humans. My team is made up of people, obviously, but literally. And our team has good days and bad days, and I think our team does exceptional work. But there are moments in time where, particularly for implementing complicated technology systems, it's a collaboration. We need the client to feel like we're working together. We need them to see this as a collaboration just as much as my team does. And I think we try pretty hard and carefully to select clients and take on and work with clients who have kind of a compatible culture and a compatible attitude. We want ones who are seeing us as a collaborator. And, we had clients many, many years ago who would get angry and yell at somebody on my team. And if you yell at the sort of the lowest tier support person, then you're not an appropriate fit for us. And so we did have to recognize early on in our first couple of decades that we would have to fire clients who didn't treat our team respectfully. And that was not fun and complicated and lots of emotions. But I think that kind of experience is an important one that kind of highlighted for us that we try to treat all of the members of our clients and all of our kind of collaborators with the utmost respect, but we do also need them to treat our teams similarly with respect. And that I think has served us well. I think, mutual cooperation, a big part of technology in the real world is figuring out how to kind of solve problems in a reasonably efficient way. And a lot of that is saying, oh, you're HR, you can do this piece. I'm, technology, I have access to this. This person has to do that. And sort of having good, clear communication, being open to sort of saying, actually, that doesn't work that way. I don't think that's a good idea. But also being open to saying, hey, is there anyone else who should be in this conversation? Is there somebody else who's actually doing this? Do you have a junior person who could do this part that we could train up? And that kind of perspective, really thinking of these as sort of collaborations with clients and collaborations with the individuals at clients, I think is a key part of our success. Certainly over the long term, when you're an organization like ours, most of our referrals come from people we worked with on a prior project who have left that organization, gone somewhere else, look around and say, this could be better. Why don't I call those guys that I liked working with before?
Fantastic. I love your approach there. Are there particular types of vertical industries you prefer to work with that are a better fit to you, or are you fairly generalist?
It's a great question. In the sort of marketing and sales world, particularly for IT companies and especially for MSPs, there's this sort of strong consensus about the best thing to do is to pick a very narrow vertical and be as kind of tightly targeted on that as possible. That's been a challenge for us because our sort of fit has never really aligned perfectly with a specific business vertical. We work with companies that are, fintech startups and small nonprofits and large nonprofits and foundations and arts organizations and manufacturing companies and companies in the cosmetics world. We've dealt with a bunch of really, really interesting organizations. And I think ultimately the common theme that we obviously have 30 years history to look back on, which makes it easier to find these kinds of needles in a haystack. But the common theme we see among all of those is really that they're organizations that want to collaborate. The culture of their executive and ownership and leadership is one where they want to have a collaborative relationship to solve these problems. They don't want to just sort of say fix it and get out of my face. That is obviously not a great dynamic for us. And there are many organizations that are like, I just want this to be a business function. I don't want to have strategy conversations. I don't want to hear what you think. I just want it to work. And those are not the right fit for us. It needs to be more collaborative. And two, they tend to be organizations that are navigating some sort of dynamic change. There are companies that are better than us at managing kind of what I would call boring, simple, straightforward environments. The company that's like a 200-person law firm that nothing ever changes, that has no big IT rollouts, that isn't moving, that's really steady state. Those are not the relationships where we tend to be best. Frankly, because those organizations can often find cheaper alternatives that are less expensive than us, and therefore, you can compare pricing more kind of easily if you're our needs are very minimal and we don't actually really care that much about how good the kind of help desk is. So maybe it's not that important. No strategy, sure, but the relationships that we tend to really resonate with are the ones where the people we're talking to are heavily invested. There's a real value-driven quality to the organization. Maybe it's mission-based or maybe it's a startup. But in all those cases where the people we're talking to are passionate about the success of this organization and recognize that the organization has some choppy, dynamic, unknown waters to navigate right in front of them.
Fantastic. Thank you for the explanation there of how you target and find the right clients for yourself. It's, in my mind, I'm down. So I have Rebel Commerce Solutions. I'm 1 year into my business and I'm trying to figure out, it's always evolving my niche, right? And the more focused I can be, the better I can serve clients again and again in a similar capacity. And the thought of having to every time as an IT consultant learn completely different software and setups and solutions, that would be terrifying to me. But for you, 30 years in, you've obviously got your processes and a high level of comfort with that chaos and complexity.
Yeah, I should say that I myself don't have a high level of comfort that my team does. So I'm, if I was solo, I don't know that I could have the intestinal fortitude to navigate this many challenges. But it's an amazing team who individually have areas of focus and experience that they can bring to bear. And we're just large enough. I think we're somewhere between 15 and 20 right now. But we're just large enough that we do have enough individuals with enough expertise that we can navigate these really broad range of technical requirements, which again, I think is critical for an organization like ours. We aren't completely platform agnostic. We definitely have tools that we don't work with and tools we really like to work with. But we will, we don't care whether an organization is Mac or Windows or Google or Microsoft or many of the common distinctions are ones that are not important to us. Those are areas where we're we can find ways to work with any number of different tools. Let's see what tools are the right fit for your needs now. And sometimes those tools change. Some of those tools evolve, 2 years from now, an organization might move from one platform to another. And we're excited to be part of that kind of evaluation and experimentation process.
Love it. Sounds like a solid squad of IT assassins you've got there. So congratulations on that. I'd love to. So when we spoke previously, you told me a little bit about switching gears. Some of the work you've continued that your father did. I've been really excited for this segment of the episode today. So I'd love you to kind of just tell the viewers about what you're working on there.
Sure. So I am involved in a couple of different nonprofits. Telling the story sort of backwards, there's a nonprofit called the Union Docs, which is a documentary arts nonprofit that I've been board president for over a decade. We're actually in the middle of a capital campaign. We bought a building in Queens after getting evicted during COVID from our Williamsburg building we'd been in for over a decade. We bought a building and did a minimal renovation and are now in the midst of a much more ambitious, much more dramatic renovation nonfiction and a big capital campaign. Really exciting. It's a residency, very unusual. I think it may be the only documentary arts residency in maybe the world, but certainly, if not the only, it's one of very few. Really, really interesting. I have lots of strong beliefs about the role of documentary and nonfiction art in today's society, particularly as I feel like journalism has sort of dropped the ball in terms of providing kind of access to kind of truth and investigative journalism and understanding the reality of the world.
I totally agree on that, and that's a subject I'm very passionate. I have very strong opinions on. But what does it mean, non-fictional art? What would be an example of non-fictional art?
That's a great question. So documentary film is a common. However, the organization has a broad definition of documentary and nonfiction. So they do things like live performances that are reenactments. Radio plays are also common. A lot of podcasts are often described as, particularly nonfiction podcasts are described as documentary arts. They also do certain kinds of photography, and they have some kind of nonlinear electronic experimental stuff. Their work definitely drifts into, they as Union Docs, drifts into things that I would call art, but also, they do a lot of documentary film that look just like traditional documentary film, and they have a great body of work. The residency is really compelling, and it's built as a collaborative, and it's a really wonderful organization that produces great work and has had just like thousands of amazing people pass through. I could go on for much longer about that than I should, so I'm going to leave that there.
Well, before you do,
experience, yeah.
Before you do, how would somebody find it? I'm guessing there's a website.
Yeah, it's uniondocs.org. So uniondocs.org. Great organization. You can also look for my name on LinkedIn, and it is listed in one of my services. In addition to, or in part related to that experience, a number of years ago, my father passed a couple of years ago, but in the years before he passed, he had spent the last decade or so after he retired from teaching. He was a professor at Brown. Continuing to develop this really interesting and really exciting website called the Victorian Web, which is victorianweb.org. And Victorian Web began in the mid to late 1980s, so before what most people think of as the World Wide Web, as sort of a scholarly reference resource for people to understand how to connect complicated ideas, particularly in this case about the Victorians.
Hang on, I'm going to dive in and stop you there, because we skipped over that super important point very, very fast, and I need to roll back and catch it. He launched a website in the 1980s. I hadn't touched the World Wide Web probably till I went to college in 97. Right?
Yeah, when Windows 95 was when most people encountered the web.
Yeah.
Technically, it wouldn't have been called a website at that point, because that's before Tim Berners-Lee's presentation. I do remember him talking about Tim Berners-Lee's presentation in Edinburgh. But before the World Wide Web in its current form existed, there were numerous academic projects, of which the Victorian Web, I think it was technically called the Dickens Web at the time, but called the Victorian Web. I could defer to other members of the nonprofit who could be more authoritative in some of the history, but that existed as sort of a interconnected hypertextual information resource. It was a very unusual and very interesting in that it was not only created by a bunch of scholars and academics, but students who were working in these classes were also contributing essays and creating kind of interconnected examples of how this information could be better understood by a classic example that was talked about quite a bit is Tennyson's In Memoriam, which is a very long, beautiful poem. Has a passage at one point in which the author is talking about a hand. And for the uninformed, you might think, oh, this is just a passing reference to somebody talking about a hand. But a scholar reading that who knows the poem and knows Alfred Lord Tennyson's sort of like family and life and history knows that this hand is a reference to a particular kind of moment in his life. It has an additional meaning and can then explain how that affects this entire kind of section of the poem. And there's numerous, of course, examples like that in literature. The footnote is a classic example of that in traditional print media. But this idea of these hypertextual connections between ideas and concepts was something that my father was very active in. He wrote a book called Hypertext, which is the most common textbook for people that are studying this kind of stuff. 3 different editions, published by Johns Hopkins. But as part of that work, he built this with many students and many others, this Dickens Web, which turned into the Victorian Web. And then to jump all the way ahead to an end part of, I'm happy to go back to the middle if you want. as he was kind of nearing the end of his life, we wanted to make sure that this kind of thing didn't sort of drift off and cease to exist. It's enormous. It's like 100,000 documents. It's an incredible resource. It's anyone who goes searching for information about Victoriana is going to find themselves on it eventually, because it's just an incredible amount of material. It also wonderfully happens that a lot of that material exists in the public domain because it's from the Victorian era, which is before sort of copyright. And so because of that, there's a lot of material on there, a lot of primary and secondary and tertiary, a lot of art. So it's a really wonderful resource, but maintaining it and building it and having it being a living thing required creating a nonprofit, which is called the Victorian Web Foundation, forming a board of directors. There already was a board of editors and a group of people who were actively involved in the content, but creating a governance organization that could essentially take over the long-term strategic thinking and also the kind of the mandate, the mission to have this resource continue to exist in perpetuity, hopefully.
Fantastic. So if I go to victorianweb.org right now, I'll be able to go and see these thousands of, do I need to log in, sign up?
It's no sign in. It's wide open, fully accessible. It's a fantastic resource. You can also you'll poke around. One of the projects that we have been working on over the last year, very leisurely and very slowly, is a modernization of some of the cascading style sheets. Not to get super duper technical here, but a lot of the technology that it was based on is now a little bit old, as you can imagine, for something that's been around this long. So one of our projects has been working with a pretty amazing designer to redesign the style sheets to make them more responsive, which is the term in this space for if you look at them on a smaller device like your phone, having the text resize so it's easier to read. We're still in the process of rolling out those changes. We tend to move slowly. We also worked with an amazing designer to redesign the logo, which I don't think has been published on the website yet, but will be in the next couple of months. So there's been a number of small but I think meaningful changes, and will continue to be a number of those over the next few years as the website sort of grows and changes.
Fantastic. I will go and take a peek. I happen to have, an interest in things from the 1800s, especially architecture, right? There are some buildings we have now. The buildings we had back then, that are so incredible, so beautiful, so well constructed, that it almost seems like we kind of regressed in terms of architecture and commitment to producing beautiful things, right? And so a lot of that, there are a lot of questions I have from the 1800s that haven't been answered. For instance, I'd love to see some architectural diagrams for some of these incredible, there are buildings in New York and all over the world. And so, yeah, that's something that I find fascinating. Were there any aspects of this whole era that your father found particularly interesting?
You mentioned architecture. It's a fantastic segue. Architecture was my undergraduate as well, so this is a wonderful confluence of all four of us, if we count John Ruskin as one of them. John Ruskin was a kind of a critic, a very prominent critic in the Victorian era. He was also talked a lot about architecture. He wrote a lot of really interesting books. You should read some of his books on architecture, which I think you would find very thought-provoking and interesting. Seven Lamps of Architecture is an example, but there's many others. He also has a number of essays that are great. Many of them are on the Victorian web, so you can poke around there. But John Ruskin is his name. John Ruskin was my father's area of focus during his PhD. So his sort of very early part of his career really focused on this particular writer. Over time, I think his interest became much, much broader. He really became very interested in the idea of hypertext, but also, like any good academic, I think had a mix of different sort of things that he was curious about, and that evolved and kind of shifted over the decades.
Fantastic. Plenty to think about there. Yeah, I will definitely check out the site after the show. And so I really appreciate having you on the show today. Thanks so much, Noah. Any final advice for businesses as they're looking into 2026 for their IT in this fast-changing world?
So we are hopefully in the final weeks or months of, I just got galley proofs a few days ago of the book. I'm hoping the book will be out soon. Tame the Tech Beast is the name of the book itself. It's a collaboration with my long time business partner, Michael Horst. And we're both a little bit particular, so I feel like we probably could spend another 2 years continuing to refine and make it slightly better, but I reached a point where it's sometimes perfection is the enemy of done, and we just have to get it out the door. So it's good. It's not perfect, but I think it's quite good. And it's really meant to be a text that's useful for maybe a director of operations or a small business owner or a startup or a CEO or a CFO, somebody who doesn't find themselves typically thinking of technology and IT as something that they want to pay attention to. And it's trying to make an argument that, hey, there's an opportunity here to think about this technology stuff in a way that benefits your organization, not just as a cost, but as a thing that can help you function better. And we kind of lay out our approach. It's actually the approach we use with a lot of our clients. We have an assessment process when somebody starts working with us, and it sort of hews close to that model. But this idea of like, how do you really kind of gain consensus and buy-in from the people who are going to be tasked with using all this stuff? And how do you kind of propose and identify opportunities for change that don't make everybody super stressed out and super frustrated? So we have a methodology for that I think is great. And the hope is that the book will maybe land on some people's plates and they will avoid making some mistakes we've seen. And maybe some of those people, if they like what they see, will also reach out to us, because we're excited to talk to more great organizations.
Very exciting. Well, I hope you get a lot of book sales and a lot of interest there. So the book is Tame the Tech Beast by Noah Landow. Noah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.